What we do, we hope, contributes.
Charles reviewed the final announcement alone, then placed the document flat on the desk without saying a word. The king understood this was not simply a calendar adjustment. Official state duties were responsibilities carried out for the crown, including ceremonial appearances, patronage visits, diplomatic receptions, and engagements alongside the sovereign. By authorizing the transfer, he was not asking his sister to fill temporary gaps. He was giving her an entire role previously associated with his wife. Camilla received the confirmation from a senior courtier moments before the palace statement became public. She did not protest or raise her voice. The Queen Consort simply asked whether Charles had personally approved every sentence. Music. And when the answer came, her expression tightened. She was not merely losing engagements. She was discovering that the man beside whom she had fought for acceptance had approved her removal from the duties that demonstrated she belonged, and was called in without ceremony and handed a sealed briefing folder. The princess opened it and discovered a revised calendar carrying her name across receptions, memorials, patronage visits, and diplomatic meetings. Music. An emergency restructuring meant the palace had reorganized responsibilities at once to prevent any interruption in royal service. Yet the preparation revealed something more troubling. The decision had been developing before Camilla was officially informed. One sentence carried the warning. The transfer would stay in effect until the sovereign decided otherwise. In simple terms, Charles alone would determine whether his wife ever regained those responsibilities, and paused over the sentence, then looked toward the first engagement placed under her authority. It was a major state reception Camilla had prepared for months, including a welcome she had personally written, and closed the folder, but she felt no sense of victory. Music. She felt the burden of stepping into another woman's position while her brother's marriage strained beneath his signature. Elsewhere inside the palace, Camilla realized that the reception intended to reinforce her standing would instead present and as the monarchy's new center of duty. But before and could fully step into Camilla's position, the palace had to confront the painful reality that this was not merely a reassignment of responsibilities. It was a clash between loyalty, marriage, and royal survival. Music. To the public, Princess and Camilla occupied separate corners of royal life. One was recognized for tireless service, while the other was known for standing beside the king through decades of controversy. Yet behind the formal smiles existed a much more fragile balance. Now that balance had fractured, music and the responsibilities being transferred were not simply appointments written on a calendar. They represented trust, status, and closeness to the crown itself, and examined the revised schedule at her private desk and felt no satisfaction. The princess had established her reputation through discipline, punctuality, and service without complaint. Music. Becoming the person the palace relied upon whenever stability started to weaken. Yet this responsibility carried a different kind of weight. She was not occupying an empty position. She was assuming duties that had become part of Camilla's public identity, and every successful appearance could appear to confirm that the Queen Consort had been replaced. Camilla opened the reception folder and carefully removed the handwritten speech she had prepared weeks before. She had written every welcome with Charles in mind, believing the occasion would strengthen her place beside him after years of criticism and opposition. A state role meant representing the crown during official ceremonies, diplomatic meetings, and public engagements on behalf of the monarchy. Losing that position meant surrendering more than a schedule. It meant watching the clearest symbol of her acceptance move into another woman's hands. And turned another page and noticed several names she had not anticipated. A senior aide entered and told her that several household staff members had already been reassigned to assist with the expanded workload. Household staff were the private secretaries, planners, and advisors responsible for managing a royal figure's official responsibilities. Music. Their reassignment showed that the restructuring extended far beyond a single reception. Music. The palace was not arranging a short-term replacement. It was creating a new center of authority around her. Camilla discovered the deeper consequence moments later. Access to selected diplomatic briefing documents had been suspended, removing her from confidential material prepared for meetings with foreign representatives. Music. She stared at the vacant space where those files normally rested and immediately understood the message. Music. Charles had not simply removed her public appearances. He had created distance between her and the private machinery of royal authority, and felt the pressure increase when a message arrived from her brother requesting a private meeting. Charles had also called for his wife separately, hoping to contain the damage before resentment hardened into open confrontation. But Camilla refused. She would not enter the room, she said, until the king explained precisely what incident had convinced him to act so abruptly. Her refusal forced the palace to look back toward the single ceremony where a private disagreement became the moment of no return. The crisis had not started with the announcement. It had begun 3 weeks earlier beneath the polished formality of a diplomatic ceremony, where one modified seating card, one private objection, and one decision made without the king's permission transformed quiet tension into open suspicion. Everyone present continued smiling, but behind closed doors, Charles realized that a boundary had been crossed, and had witnessed the precise moment everything shifted, and spotted the revised card only minutes before the Commonwealth service of renewal was scheduled to begin. The princess had been positioned behind 2 less senior representatives and removed from the place beside her brother during the central presentation. The order of precedence was the official ranking, music, that determined where each royal figure stood during formal occasions, and altering it was never an insignificant detail. It influenced status, authority, and the message delivered to every diplomat watching. And folded the card once and approached Camilla in private. She asked whether the alteration had been intentional, keeping her voice controlled even as the insults settled heavily between them. The queen consort did not deny it. She answered that the monarchy needed to reflect the king's household first, a statement that made the meaning painfully obvious, and was being pushed aside, not because of ceremony, but because her closeness to Charles had become a concern. Camilla maintained her position. Yet the choice carried greater risk than she acknowledged. The approved arrangement had positioned and beside the king because she was leading the presentation of a new Commonwealth initiative. Moving her disrupted the structure of the ceremony and suggested that personal rivalry mattered more than the sovereign's plan. Still, and declined to react publicly. Music. She returned to her position, completed every responsibility, and preserved the dignity of the ceremony while absorbing the humiliation. Charles discovered the truth only after the final guest had left. A senior courtier placed the original arrangement beside the modified version and explained that his authority had been used to authorize the change without his approval. The king studied both documents and recognized the deeper betrayal. His name had not been used to resolve a practical issue. It had been used to settle a private dispute over rank. The courtier then presented a documented email sent to Camilla's office hours before the ceremony. It clearly stated that the order must not be changed. She had received the instruction, understood it, and disregarded it anyway. When Charles later asked and why she had stayed silent, she replied that she would never embarrass the crown publicly, but she would not permit the same thing to happen again. That response remained with Charles until the night he finally brought and Camilla into the same room, music, and demanded the truth directly. There were no photographers, no secretaries recording notes, and no ceremonial smiles to soften the tension. Charles entered first, and came next, and Camilla arrived last. When the door shut, the dispute was no longer about a seating card or a reception schedule. It became a confrontation over authority, humiliation, and whether private loyalty had been used to manipulate the public machinery of the crown. Charles instructed every aide to remain outside and place the documents between them. The king had selected a private sitting room because the crisis was both personal and constitutional. Constitutional authority meant the power connected to the sovereign's official position, not merely his wishes as a husband or brother. On the table rested the altered ceremony plan, the ignored warning, and the email that had used his name to approve a change he had never accepted. Camilla spoke first. The queen consort insisted she had acted to defend the dignity of the sovereign's household, arguing that those closest to Charles should remain at the center of royal occasions. Music. She accused Anne of treating every adjustment as a personal insult and argued that the palace could not continue bending around one woman's pride. Her voice stayed controlled, but the anger beneath it was impossible to miss. Music. And responded without raising her voice. The princess explained that the insult had never been about where she stood. It concerned the king's authority being used without permission. Charles had authorized one arrangement, yet another had been imposed under his name. She looked directly toward Camilla and made the accusation clear. Private insecurity had been placed above public responsibility, and everyone inside the room understood it. Charles asked the question neither woman could escape. Had Camilla known the revised order had already been rejected? Silence followed. Then she admitted she had seen the warning but believed her husband would support the decision once the ceremony ended. The admission landed harder than any denial. She had not misunderstood the instruction. She had deliberately chosen to disregard it. Charles removed his glasses and placed them beside the documents. The king then disclosed that an emergency transfer of responsibilities had already been prepared. Such an order was a formal instruction transferring official duties from one royal figure to another without delay. Camilla's expression shifted immediately. This meeting was not a warning, and it was not an effort at reconciliation. The decision had already progressed beyond words. Camilla rose from her chair and faced her husband one final time. She told Charles that signing the order would do more than weaken her standing. Music. It would expose who genuinely controlled the palace and who had already determined that and was the safer option. Her final words raised an even more dangerous question. Was Charles acting by himself, or had a hidden circle already concluded that and represented the monarchy's safest future? Royal authority rarely moves through one dramatic order. It operates through calendars, private secretaries, legal wording, security briefings, and the quiet cooperation of people who understand what cannot be permitted to fail. Music. Charles may have approved the order, but the machinery behind it had been working for days, and his name had surfaced repeatedly as the only solution everyone trusted. Charles listened while his private office assessed the consequences. The king's advisers reviewed patronages, overseas visits, investitures, military ceremonies, and appearances already committed to the royal calendar. An investiture was a formal ceremony where the sovereign or another senior royal presented honours to members of the public. Cancelling these responsibilities would cause embarrassment at home and uncertainty overseas. Replacing Camilla gradually was not an option. The palace required someone who could move forward without hesitation, and provided that certainty. The princess already maintained a demanding workload, understood constitutional boundaries, and had stayed clear of the personal controversies that could transform every appearance into another dispute. Her discipline made her the strongest candidate, but that strength created a danger of its own. The more reliable she appeared, the more Camilla's removal would seem intentional, permanent, music, and intensely personal. William received the briefing privately and selected his words carefully. The prince told his father that and could stabilize the institution, protect the schedule, and reassure foreign guests. Then he delivered the warning Charles had been trying to avoid. The decision might preserve the monarchy's public image, but it could permanently harm his marriage. The future king understood that royal stability frequently required sacrifice. Yet he also recognized that some wounds did not disappear once an announcement ended. Music. Charles admitted something the advisers had not expected him to reveal. He believed he had failed both women. He had failed Camilla as a husband by allowing anxiety and insecurity to develop without confrontation. Music. He had failed and as a brother by expecting her to tolerate quiet humiliations for the sake of family harmony. The king now confronted the painful consequence of that silence. Protecting one relationship had damaged them all. The advisers then produced documented concerns from multiple foreign delegations. Their written reports described last-minute alterations, changed guest arrangements, and directions from Camilla's office that conflicted with previously approved plans. The ceremony disagreement had not been an isolated incident. It had simply exposed a pattern that could no longer be overlooked, and agreed to take the responsibilities, but only after making one condition. No announcement could imply that she had requested, pursued, or campaigned for the position. Music. She would accept responsibility, not victory. Before sunrise, the updated roster was distributed, and one recipient immediately forwarded it to Camilla's household. By morning, the decision had escaped the room where it had been made, music, and Camilla began dismantling the life that had been organized around her official position. The harshest sign of lost authority was not a public statement or an aggressive headline. It was an empty calendar. Engagements that had carried Camilla's name for months disappeared one after another, replaced by Anne's. Speeches were reassigned, briefings withdrawn, and familiar staff redirected. For the first time since becoming central to royal life, Camilla was forced to watch the monarchy continue without depending on her. Camilla sat beside her private secretary as briefing books, transportation plans, music, speech drafts, and guest lists were removed from her office. The Queen Consort watched months of preparation vanish in silence. Briefing books were official documents containing schedules, background information, names, and guidance for royal engagements. Without them, she no longer possessed the information required to represent the crown. That loss made the transfer real in a way no announcement ever could. Camilla moved her finger across the crossed-out appointments. A hospital visit, a diplomatic luncheon, a military commemoration, and the state reception had all been transferred without hesitation. Each event had mattered because it connected her to the public position she had spent years establishing. She had endured suspicion, criticism, and opposition to reach the center of royal life. Now a single morning, music, had removed the evidence that the struggle had meant something. Camilla asked whether any official responsibility remained under her authority. Her private secretary paused before explaining that only private charitable contact could continue. Such contact meant she could personally support causes but could no longer appear as a representative of the monarchy. The distinction struck deeply. She could still care, still write, still provide support, but she could no longer speak with the authority of the crown behind her. The fracture spread inside her own household. One longtime aide refused to move Tuan's team and resigned immediately, saying loyalty could not simply be transferred like a calendar entry. Another accepted the reassignment without objection. Camilla heard both decisions and understood what they represented. Even those closest to her were being forced to choose between personal loyalty and institutional survival. Charles sent a handwritten message asking her to meet him before Anne's first major engagement. The king did not send an aide or issue a formal summons. Music. He wrote the request himself, hoping that something personal might still reach her. Camilla read it once, then left it unanswered beside the removed state documents. Her silence was not peace. It was the only control she believed she still possessed, and learned that the note had remained untouched and felt the burden grow even heavier. The princess understood that carrying out the new responsibilities without confronting the damage would transform service into silent punishment. So before appearing in Camilla's place, Anne crossed the palace alone and requested the conversation everyone else had been unwilling to arrange. No aides announced Anne's arrival. No official record preserved what happened next. She entered carrying neither the duty folder nor the authority that had suddenly been placed in her hands. Camilla stood beside a closed diary, expecting accusation. Instead, Anne offered something far more difficult: music, the truth without ceremony, without witnesses, and without the protection of royal titles. And had requested the meeting before attending the state reception. The princess believed the transfer could not truly begin while both women remained trapped in silence. Camilla agreed only after confirming that Charles would not be present. Without the king in the room, there would be no institutional shield, the formal protection created when royal authority, advisors, or official procedure stood between two people. This time, neither woman could hide behind duty. And spoke first. She told Camilla she had never wanted the reassigned responsibilities and did not regard the decision as a personal triumph. Every engagement she accepted would carry the weight of another woman's loss. Yet she could not refuse when the stability of the crown was at stake. Empty chairs, cancelled visits, and uncertain foreign guests would damage far more than one household. They would make the monarchy appear fragile at the very moment it needed confidence. Camilla listened quietly before admitting what she had refused to say in front of Charles. The queen consort confessed that the altered ceremony arrangement had been driven by insecurity. Anne's respect within the palace seemed effortless, while her own place beside the king had been built through years of resistance. Every time the princess stood close to her brother, Camilla feared the comparison. One woman appeared naturally trusted. The other still felt she had to prove she deserved her place. And did not soften the truth, but she revealed something unexpected. She had asked Charles to review the transfer after 3 months. The princess explained that a formal review meant the king would reconsider whether the arrangement should continue once the immediate crisis had passed. She had never requested permanent control, nor did she wish to turn temporary responsibility into lasting exclusion. Camilla opened the reception folder and removed the unfinished speech. She handed it to and quietly requested that the opening tribute remain unchanged because it honored Charles, not either of them. The gesture did not restore trust, but it broke the silence that had surrounded them. And accepted the pages, and for the first time Camilla no longer saw an enemy taking her place. When and left, Camilla picked up the king's handwritten note. She read it once more, then walked toward the private room where Charles had been waiting. Their conversation did not restore Camilla's authority, but it changed the meaning of Anne's first appearance, and the world was about to witness that difference. Music. By the time Anne arrived at the state reception, the announcement had already become a national spectacle. Every gesture was examined for signs of triumph, resentment, or rebellion. Yet the defining image was not Anne walking beneath royal banners. It was a photograph captured seconds before the doors opened, the princess holding Camilla's handwritten speech, her thumb resting over a line neither woman had chosen to remove. Broadcasters interrupted regular programming as the reception began. They explained that and had now assumed the complete schedule transferred from Camilla, not merely a single appearance. A state reception was a formal gathering where senior royals welcomed diplomats, officials, and honored guests on behalf of the crown. The event mattered because any sign of uncertainty would suggest that private conflict had weakened the monarchy's ability to perform its public responsibilities. And paused briefly before entering. The princess understood that success carried its own cruelty. If she appeared completely confident, Camilla's removal would seem justified. If she hesitated, Charles's decision would appear reckless. Music. Palace staff repeatedly emphasized continuity, insisting that royal obligations would continue without disruption. Yet and knew every calm word she delivered would be compared with a woman whose speech remained in her hands. Camilla watched the broadcast beside Charles. The Queen Consort heard and began with the tribute she herself had written for the king, and grief rose alongside reluctant pride. Music. Her words were still serving the crown even though she no longer possessed the right to speak them. Charles remained silent, but he watched his wife closely. He could see how deeply the moment hurt her, and he could also see that and had refused to erase her from the occasion. The photograph spread before the reception had even concluded. A national newspaper placed it across the front page beneath the headline, "The duty passes." But the words remain. The image shifted the public mood, and no longer appeared to be celebrating a triumph. She seemed to be carrying responsibility while protecting the dignity of the woman who had lost it. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered beneath the balcony. One woman raised a handwritten sign reading, "Service without revenge." Others repeated the phrase as cameras turned toward them. The public had discovered its symbol. Not the fall of Camilla, but Anne's refusal to transform that fall into humiliation. Charles received a final message after the reception. Camilla was prepared to meet him. The king understood that the next conversation would determine whether her removal became a punishment or the beginning of a different position. The public had delivered its judgment on Anne, but only Charles and Camilla could decide what remained of their marriage and what her removal would ultimately mean. The final meaning of the crisis was determined away from the cameras. Charles and Camilla sat opposite each other with no announcement prepared and no advisors waiting to shape their words. The responsibilities would not be returned, and would continue carrying them. But the conversation that followed changed the decision from an act of public rejection into a painful boundary, one that protected the monarchy while forcing everyone involved to confront the consequences. Charles spoke without hiding behind formal language. Music. The king confirmed that and would retain every transferred state responsibility for the foreseeable future because consistency, trust, and clear authority now had to come before personal comfort. State representation meant appearing and speaking on behalf of the crown during official ceremonies, diplomatic engagements, and national occasions. Music. Returning those responsibilities too quickly would weaken the decision and suggest. Camilla listened until he had finished. The Queen Consort would remain beside her husband in private family life and attend limited personal occasions, but she would no longer control the official program that had positioned her at the center of public duty. She admitted that losing the schedule felt like losing the final evidence that their long struggle had been accepted. Years of criticism had seemed worth enduring because the monarchy had eventually granted her a visible position. Now that symbol had disappeared. Charles did not dismiss her pain. He acknowledged that the loss was genuine, but he refused to reverse the order. The monarch then admitted his own failure. His silence had allowed insecurity between Camilla and Anne to deepen until every minor adjustment carried the weight of rivalry. By refusing to establish firm boundaries earlier, he had protected temporary peace while allowing trust to fracture beneath it, and received a handwritten message later that evening. The princess found only 2 sentences inside. Camilla asked her to protect the charitable causes connected to the transferred role and promised that she would not interfere again. The message carried no demand for recognition and no attempt to regain control. It was the first indication that acceptance had replaced resistance. Music. And preserved those causes within the updated schedule. She refused to erase the work simply because authority had passed into different hands. Music. The decision demonstrated that accepting responsibility did not require humiliating the woman who had carried it before. Duty could remain firm without becoming cruel. The transfer became the clearest statement of the monarchy Charles intended to preserve. Affection could influence private life, but official trust had to be earned, protected, and never borrowed without permission. And when Anne stepped forward while Camilla stepped back, the monarchy did not celebrate a victor. It survived because 3 wounded people finally accepted that duty without trust is only ceremony. But duty guided by accountability can still protect the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.